In this series, I look at Nietzsche as human, all too human. We'll begin with the preface, written 10 years after the book's publication. It's written as a kind of reflection on the time leading up to and during the book being written, as well as the reasons for writing the book. One of the important things to set up here is his personal relationship with Richard Wagner and his love of the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, two important guiding pillars in his life. Nietzsche first met Wagner in Leipzig in 1868, and from then on seemed to be enamored with the figure. As the relationship blossomed, Nietzsche would refer to Wagner as the master. His love for Schopenhauer came upon him with a similar force when he stumbled upon The World as Will and Representation in a second-hand bookstore. The magnitude of these two figures' inspiration on Nietzsche cannot be taken lightly. Their influence on the birth of tragedy and its themes is well known. But Nietzsche had been experiencing tension with Wagner and Schopenhauer leading up to this book. He had been looking for a way to distance himself from Wagner in particular, and felt that Schopenhauer's philosophy was too pessimistic. In this preface, Nietzsche isn't just moving away from those pillars. He offers us a confession that his devotion to them was an intentional self-deception, a lie he told himself in order to survive his profound isolation. One thing to keep in mind throughout this video is whether or not we should fully trust this sentiment, or if Nietzsche is being calculative in his reflection. Section 1 of the preface reads, "I have been told often enough, and always with an expression of great surprise, that all my writings, from The Birth of Tragedy to the most recently published Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future, have something that distinguishes them and unites them together. They, all of them, I have been given to understand, contain snares and nets for unwary birds, and in effect, a persistent invitation to the overturning of habitual evaluations and valued habits." What? Everything only human, all too human? It is with this sigh that one emerges from my writings, not without a kind of reserve and mistrust, even in regard to morality, not a little tempted and emboldened, indeed for once to play the advocate of the worst things, as though they have perhaps been only the worst slandered? In the first sentence, Nietzsche explains that his work oftentimes seems to go against the grain. His response to this? That what he is doing is exposing where our social habituations come from. In this regard, he is setting up one of the main themes of the book as a whole. He wants to show us that the most prized things, such as morality, are nothing more than our most basic and flawed impulses, not some untouchable and objective things which exist in the distance and out of reach to us. Years later, in his autobiography, Ecce Homo, he actually looked back at this exact book and explained what he meant, stating, "Idealism does not belong to me. The title says, where you see ideal things, I see human, oh, just all too human things." As he writes, when one comes away with a sigh after seeing our ideals exposed as what they are, merely human, all too human things, what is there to do? He seems to think that the majority of people who read this will come out a bit more suspicious of our everyday unquestioned beliefs. For anyone who believes in this romantic kind of idealism, this introduction should hit like a crashing wave. He literally tells us that he is a bird catcher. He wants to forcibly overturn the bad habits of those who are unwary and inattentive. But right after laying this trap, Nietzsche switches gears and gives us a personal confession of sorts. He states, "My writings have been called a schooling in suspicion, even more in contempt. but fortunately also in courage, indeed in audacity. And in fact, I myself do not believe that anyone has ever before looked into the world with an equally profound degree of suspicion, and not merely as an occasional devil's advocate, but, to speak theologically, just as much as an enemy and indicter of God, and anyone who could divine something of the consequences that lie in that profound suspiciousness, something of the fears and frosts of the isolation to which that unconditional disparity of view condemns him who is infected with it, will also understand how often, in an effort to recover from myself, as it were to induce a temporary self forgetting, I have sought shelter in this or that, in some piece of admiration or enmity, or scientificality, or frivolity, or stupidity, and why, where I could not find what I needed, I had artificially to enforce, falsify, and invent a suitable fiction for myself. And what else have poets ever done? And to what end does art exist in the world at all? What I again and again needed most for my cure and self restoration, however, was the belief that I was not thus isolated, not alone in seeing as I did. An enchanted surmising of relatedness and identity in I and desires, a reposing in a trust of friendship, a blindness in concert with another, without suspicion or question marks, a pleasure in foregrounds, surfaces, things close and closest, in everything possessing color, skin, and apparitionality. Perhaps in this regard, I might be reproached with having employed a certain amount of art, a certain amount of false coinage. For example, that I knowingly, willfully closed my eyes before Schopenhauer's blind will to morality at a time when I was already sufficiently clear-sighted about morality. Likewise, that I deceived myself over Richard Wagner's incurable romanticism, as though it were a beginning and not an end. Likewise over the Greeks, likewise over the Germans and their future, and perhaps a whole long list could be made of such likewises. What is he getting at? Interestingly, he seems to be revealing the fact that these against the grain thoughts have been within him for a much longer time than any of his readers would have been aware. What is it like to be openly suspicious of the things that almost everyone around you do not question or care to challenge? He is openly admitting that this kind of view is heavily isolating. Being the devil's advocate literally opposes the norm. It turns him into an outcast. But by being able to pivot into different perspectives, such as the one he takes up in The Birth of Tragedy, he can find a way of escaping this isolation. He is putting forward a profound admission that essentially all the things that he had previously delved into were for the sake of feeling a sense of understanding, of common ground amongst peers and the public, of escaping his isolation. He then uses this grand confession as a way to reveal another unexpected turn in his thinking, that life lives on deception, another theme which finds itself discussed throughout the book. He states, supposing, however, that all this were true, and that I was reproached with it with good reason, what do you know? What could you know? Of how much cunning in self-preservation, how much reason in higher safeguarding is contained in such self-deception, or of how much falsity I shall require if I am to continue to permit myself the luxury of my truthfulness. Enough. I am still living. And life is, after all, not a product of morality. It wants deception. It lives on deception. But there you are. I'm already off again, am I not? And doing what I have always done, old moralist and bird-catcher that I am. Speaking unmorally, extra-morally, beyond good and evil. The ending to this part of the preface is written in an unbelievably beautiful fashion. It's as if he's cutting through this personal entry back into his more academic and philosophizing persona. Even though he is still letting us into his world, he is also reminding us again of his bird catching ways. Can we even trust the personal tone? He also makes a point of transitioning from unmoral or immoral to extramoral, even beyond morality. He's making a point of saying he is outside of the framework that, generally, most of his readers are in. The way the reader sees the world is not the same way that Nietzsche sees it. Morality is not a basic fundamental law, it's a biological mechanism for survival. Thus, Nietzsche sees judging life through a moral lens, ultimately as a mistake. The main thrust of the end point here is to say that life chooses living first over anything else. If deception causes one to live longer over morality, life will choose deception. He is essentially putting forward a point that he knows is almost entirely against conventional values. He knows that this would be seen as immoral, but he does not care. Like he says, he's speaking beyond good and evil. He does not hold himself to a standard he just exposed as a biological mechanism. To circle back for a moment, why would Nietzsche be exposing himself in such a way? Why make it known that your previous influences and speculations about life and the world were mere self-deception? I think it's because, writing this preface 10 years later, he is finally comfortable in his own skin. I think the tone here is triumphant. He has survived sickness and isolation. Given the themes in this book, which we'll get into, it is not out of the question that writing Human All Too Human was actually a big pivot and risk in his life. He essentially does a 180 in position, thereby gambling his relationships and community, leaving himself in a position of isolation. This leads us to the second section of the preface. What do you do when you have abandoned your mentors, your old beliefs, and find yourself isolated? If you are Nietzsche, you invent new friends, future friends. Section 2 reads, thus, when I needed to, I once also invented for myself the free spirits, to whom this melancholy valiant book, with the title Human All Too Human, is dedicated. Free spirits of this kind do not exist, did not exist, but, as I have said, I had need of them at the time if I was to keep in good spirits while surrounded by ills, sickness, solitude, unfamiliar places, acedia, inactivity. As brave companions and familiars with whom one can laugh and chatter when one feels like laughing and chattering, and whom one can send to the devil when they become tedious, as compensation for the friends I lacked. That free spirits of this kind could one day exist, that our Europe will have such active and audacious fellows among its sons of tomorrow and the next day, physically present and palpable, and not, as in my case, merely phantoms and hermits' phantasmagoria. I should wish to be the last to doubt it. I see them already coming, slowly, slowly, and perhaps I shall do something to speed their coming if I describe in advance under what vicissitudes, upon what paths, I see them coming. It wouldn't be unfair for a first-time reader to assume that these free spirits actually exist. After all, the book is dedicated to them. The full title reads, Human All Too Human, a book for free spirits. But Nietzsche shatters this perception, stating that these free spirits were a manifestation of his need for friends that did not exist. Not just any kind of friend, though, ones which were like in mind. This fits into the narrative he is building about his isolation and sickness. It aligns with his claim that he had dropped his ties with Wagner and Schopenhauer and had no friends left. but what is actually happening in Nietzsche's personal life during the period in which he is writing Human All Too Human that he omits in the preface. During the writing process, he was actually very close friends with a psychologist named Paul Ray. The two thinkers drew inspiration heavily from one another. The other friends that Nietzsche kept throughout his life, ones he omits here possibly for intellectual reasons, even commented after Human All Too Human's publication that it seemed dominated by Paul Ray's thoughts and influence. Their friendship was well known in Nietzsche's circle. Ray even introduced Nietzsche to Lou Salome, which would eventually lead to a passionate intellectual love triangle formed by the three of them. When he was writing this preface, these friendships had been bitterly broken off, and by taking his own philosophical advice, he skated around this reality by deceiving himself. Though one could also argue that through reflection, Nietzsche ultimately felt as though he actually was alone, even during the time when Ray was there with him. Nietzsche clearly had an idea in mind with the free spirit type, and it's possible that Ray just did not live up to the demands of that kind of person. Nietzsche ends this section by prophesying the eventual coming of these free spirits. We can gather that Nietzsche does actually believe this type of person can exist and will exist. Will it be under the influence of Nietzsche's writing or his goals for the future? Might he actually find free spirits thanks to his reaching out to them through this book? Section 3 reads, one may conjecture that a spirit in whom the type free spirit will one day become ripe and sweet to the point of perfection has had its decisive experience in a great liberation, and that previously it was all the more a fettered spirit, and seemed to be chained forever to its pillar and corner. What fetters the fastest? What bonds are all but unbreakable? In the case of men of a high and select kind, they will be their duties. That reverence proper to youth, that reserve and delicacy before all that is honored and revered from old, that gratitude for the soil out of which they have grown, for the hand which led them, for the holy place where they learned to worship. Their supreme moments themselves will fetter them the fastest, lay upon them the most enduring obligation. The great liberation comes for those who are thus fettered suddenly, like the shock of an earthquake. The youthful soul is all at once convulsed, torn loose, torn away. It itself does not know what is happening. A drive and impulse rules and masters it like a command. A will and desire awakens to go off, anywhere at any cost. A vehement, dangerous curiosity for an undiscovered world flames and flickers in all its senses. Better to die than to go on living here, thus responds the imperious voice in temptation. And this here, this at home, is everything it had hitherto loved. A sudden terror and suspicion of what it loved, a lightning bolt of contempt for what it called duty, a rebellious, arbitrary, volcanically erupting desire for travel, strange places, estrangements, coldness, soberness, frost, a hatred of love, perhaps a desecrating blow and glance backwards to where it formerly loved and worshipped, perhaps a hot blush of shame at what it had just done, and at the same time, an exultation that it has done it, a drunken, inwardly exultant shudder which betrays that a victory has been won. A victory? Over what? Over whom? An enigmatic, question-packed, questionable victory, but the first victory nonetheless. Such bad and painful things are part of the history of the great liberation. It is at the same time a sickness that can destroy the man who has it, the first outbreak of strength and will to self-determination, to evaluating on one's own account. This will to free will. and how much sickness is expressed in the wild experiments and singularities through which the liberated prisoner now seeks to demonstrate his mastery over things. He prowls cruelly around with an unslaked lasciviousness. What he captures has to expiate the perilous tension of his pride. What excites him he tears apart. With a wicked laugh, he turns round whatever he finds veiled, and through some sense of shame or other, spared and pampered. He puts to the test what these things look like when they are reversed. It is an act of wilfulness and pleasure in wilfulness if now he perhaps bestows his favour on that which has hitherto had a bad reputation. If, full of inquisitiveness and the desire to tempt and experiment, he creeps around the things most forbidden. Behind all his toiling and weaving, for he is restlessly and aimlessly on his way as if in a desert, stands the question mark of a more and more perilous curiosity. Can all values not be turned round? And is good perhaps evil? And God only an invention and finesse of the devil? Is everything perhaps in the last resort false? And if we are deceived, are we not for that very reason also deceivers? Must we not be deceivers? Such thoughts as these tempt him and lead him on, even further away, and even further down. Solitude encircles and embraces him, ever more threatening, suffocating, heart-tightening. That terrible goddess and mater seva cupidinum. But who today knows what solitude is? I remember a period right after I graduated high school, a week or two of intense and visceral anxiety and disassociation. During this period, it was as if the kind of calm stillness of life was ruptured by sudden crashing waves. I remember not really understanding why I was feeling the way I did, but upon reflection years later, I came to realize that I was unconsciously feeling an intense shift in my life. This seemingly minor change felt like the kind of earthquake moment in my life. I do not know if I would call myself a free spirit in the same way that Nietzsche designates, but I certainly remember this moment in my life as the one that sort of tore away the veil and ripped away the anchor, as it were. I cannot say for certain this is exactly what Nietzsche has in mind here, but this is the way that I can relate to it. This section is dense and packed with lucid imagery. I'll now go over some of the key moments I think elucidate the points Nietzsche is trying to make. First and foremost is the how of how one becomes a free spirit. Rather than some kind of gradual process of change, say through rigorous study and reflection, Nietzsche puts forward the idea that becoming a free spirit, or ripening into one, is a sudden process. Quote, "The great liberation comes for those who are thus fettered suddenly, like the shock of an earthquake. The youthful soul is all at once convulsed, torn loose, torn away. It itself does not know what is happening." End quote. It's a world-shattering process of awakening into something different. He goes on, a sudden terror and suspicion of what it loved, a lightning bolt of contempt for what it called duty, a rebellious, arbitrary, volcanically erupting desire for travel, strange places, estrangements, coldness, soberness, frost, a hatred of love, perhaps a desecrating blow and glance backwards to where it formerly loved and worshipped, perhaps a hot blush of shame at what it has just done, and at the same time an exultation that it has done it, a drunken, inwardly exultant shudder which betrays that a victory has been won. A victory over what? Over whom? An enigmatic, question-packed, questionable victory, but the first victory nonetheless. Such bad and painful things are part of the history of the great liberation. End quote. This is an inherently rebellious phase in which the free spirit actually seems to still be fettered by something different than what it used to be fettered by. Rather than believing in their old idols and values, They now look back with contempt, scorn, and anger. They want to destroy, mock, and laugh at what they used to hold so dearly. They are at first a danger to themselves. This is not the free spirit's final state, and the state itself is certainly not a good one. Nietzsche says it is marked by pain. He then goes on to describe this path of pain and the overwhelming passions which swell in this person. It is a period marked by an untamable and unquenchable destruction, suspicion, and questioning. Nietzsche says that the sickness can even destroy someone. The further one goes down this frenzy, the more lonely and isolated they become, the further removed from any realities. Breaking free from one's old chains, one's old anchor, does not instantly grant one the status of being healthy and free. Here Nietzsche argues that the usual response to realizing one's morality was just a biological mechanism for survival, is to fall into a deep and endless nihilism. The freedom from the old chains can at first be worse than the chains themselves. Rather than offering one joy, it may just be abysmally cold and lonely, even destructive. So, we have just seen this hypothetical person tear themselves away from their duties, their religion, their mentors, their life as they knew it. They are wandering in a desert of sorts, completely isolated and acting in a state of rebellion. They have come to the realization that everything they used to believe in and worship was just human, all too human. But Nietzsche offers us hints throughout that this is not the end goal. This phase is just a sickness. One who stays in this phase forever will ultimately become a bitter nihilist, or even just be overcome and destroyed. This is where Nietzsche leaves us off in section 3. The question then becomes clear to us. How do we survive this rebellious phase, the isolation? And how does one become a healthy free spirit? How do we move past the destruction of our old idols? Is it possible to build new ones? Is it necessary? In the next video, we will take a look at sections 4, 5, and 6 to see what Nietzsche's response to these questions will be. Thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.